Greetings again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of OSI Today, the podcast featuring news and views from around the Office of Special Investigations. I'm Hein from OSI Public Affairs. August 1st, 2023 marks the 75th anniversary of OSI's inception, and throughout the year, the Command is commemorating the occasion based on the theme Inspired by Our Past, OSI's future starts today. And with me to discuss how the Office of Procurement Fraud Investigations fits into that scenario is Procurement Fraud Director, Mr. Jason Hein. Sir, welcome to the program. Always great to chat with you. Welcome aboard.
Hey, you too, Wayne. Thanks. Glad to be here.
Now, let's dive in, shall we? Because I know PF is, as we mentioned off mic, BF is very, very busy all the time. Just kind of a historical perspective here to kick things off for our novice listeners to OSI and to procurement fraud. When and how did the activation of procurement fraud come about?
Well, that's going back a minute. Procurement fraud set up in 2013 was when we were activated. Mm-hmm. And the problem that caused the activation of the Office of Procurement Fraud was prior to the creation of PF, as we call it, fraud agents in OSI were decentralized. We were assigned to regular operating bases across the country, mostly aligned under Region 1. Mm-hmm. Region 1 was aligned with the Air Force Materiel Command, so it makes sense that the fraud agents are with your buying command.
Right.
But the decentralized, the nature of the procurement fraud mission at that time didn't really allow for fraud agents to effectively focus on fraud. They were getting pulled to do other things a lot. And so it was kind of a 50, 75% of your time was working fraud, and then you were working something else at other times. So it really didn't allow us to do anything proactive. Uh-huh. And we had a really low percentage of investigations in which OSI, even if there was a DAF interest in a case, was the lead agency. A lot of times we let other agencies run lead on the fraud cases because we just really didn't have the time.
Right.
And we kept getting pulled to do other things. So PF was created in 2013 in order to properly support those investigations and our customers. OSI needed to provide a dedicated fraud investigators to investigate just fraud that was getting more and more complex as the weapon systems got more and more complex, mm-hmm. And the corruption cases across the DAF.
And also, for our new listeners, sir, again, DAF is Department of the Air Force.
Department of the Air Force, right. Absolutely.
Right.
And it also allowed us to let agents stay in place longer because of our cases run longer. Generally, we're looking at 5 to 7 years before they're properly and completely adjudicated. Right now, we just closed an investigation that was 11 years in the making, where justice just got disposition on one of our cases. But the long-term nature of fraud investigations left OSI in this difficult position of supporting investigations when we had other interests as well pulling at us while we were attached to the debt.
I see.
So the creation of PF was kind of OSI acknowledging that fact. And better serving our customers and dedicating ourselves to fraud. And the stand-up of PF really had 3 main objectives. And one was to refocus the mission, to give all the agents a dedicated mission to go after, to align with the interests of our customers. Our 2 primary customers are the PEOs and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and to centralize and define procurement fraud within the Air Force. So PF now plays a much greater role in the bigger Air Force in procurement fraud and what it is and how to combat it than we did before.
I see. Okay, very good. Now, sir, you mentioned PF, as it's also called, has as its major customers Air Force acquisitions, and as you just mentioned, PEOs, or many program executive offices. What unique challenge or challenges does that diverse responsibility present for the folks in PF?
Oh, there's quite a few. When AFMC realigned to the PEO construct, these program executive officers, what they are AFMC created 4 centers and a laboratory responsible for acquisition and sustainment and testing. And these officers are responsible for managing Air Force weapon systems from their inception until they're cradle to grave, from when we first think them up to when we decommission them.
Sure.
And as of now, there are over 24 PEOs. We keep activating PEOs and
Wow.
reorganizing every couple of years. So
hmm
there's a lot of them. So the PF customer base, when you're looking at these PEOs, is more senior and more diverse than any other OSI region, with the exception probably of PJ, our Office of Special Projects.
Right.
These customers, the PEOs, operate at the strategic level of the Air Force and have greater operational impact than other OSI customers.
Hmm.
This means PF has a greater impact on and responsibility to each warfighter.
I see.
One of the big
Yeah.
problems, or one of the big challenges with that, is PF investigations often impact more than one of these PEOs. So a part that goes on one airplane may also go on another airplane that is overseen by a different PEO in another part of the country.
Right.
So that necessitates a much more complex network of coordination within our directorate and within the different detachments within my directorate, to communicate to all of the stakeholders. Our offices are also aligned geographically. So again, one PF detachment may have a PEO that covers space, and another PF detachment may have a PEO that covers nuclear. And those two PEOs may have something, they both may have interests in a particular investigation.
Right.
So one detachment has to make sure that the other detachment is up to speed on their case to make sure that that PEO that has the interest is also briefed in on it. Therefore, it requires constant communication among my detachments to ensure the investigations in everybody's AOR are covered.
I see.
Additionally, while we support the PEOs, we can't do that alone. I mentioned the Department of Justice earlier.
Right.
We need the Justice Department to represent the Air Force in federal court. We don't represent the Air Force in court. The Justice Department does that on our behalf. So we need to maintain relationships with U.S. attorneys' offices in every federal district in the country.
Wow.
This means, depending on the detachment's location, they may fall under 3 or 4 different judicial districts, and each of those judicial districts may have different rules or priorities or thresholds in what kind of cases they'll accept. So the longer a case agent is able to stay in a location and learn those things and learn the nuances of each office, the more effective they get.
I see.
And so that's another challenge. And finally,
Yeah.
a third challenge is U.S. attorneys in our sister services don't move their personnel as much as OSI does. So when we have a case that takes 8 years, it's very hard. The AUSAs don't like to see multiple case agents on one case. They want to see, one case agent who can serve as a witness in court.
Right.
For the duration of the case. So that's many times they'll prefer to have another agency take the lead if we move our focus around too much. And that ends up with OSI maybe not being the loudest voice at the table when DAF interests come up, and we have to count on other agencies to do that.
Right. Yeah, certainly. Obviously, it sounds like a lot of moving parts that are involved, and coordination is one of the keys. Mr. Hein, headquartered at Joint Base Anacostia Bowling in Washington, D.C., as you are, PF's mission is, quote, to deliver specialized investigative techniques, upholding the integrity of the Air and Space Force's acquisition systems by rooting out corruption, protecting resources, and preserving warfighter safety and capabilities. Now, all that being said, in your view, what's been PF's key to successfully accomplishing that all-encompassing mission?
Well, we say PF has to move at the speed of the private sector. Many of our cases take a long time, and they seem to move very slowly. But the DAF is is often the victim of fraud by perpetrators that are operating in the private sector and operating at that speed. So fraudsters have become more sophisticated over the course of the years I've been in this work, and so have we. Our training regimen has had to evolve to mirror that of the private sector, and so that ensures our agents are trained to the latest fraud schemes used against us, used against the Air Force. We partnered with private sector entities to give us kind of up to the minute training on different fraud schemes that are out there and how they're working. But really, one of the biggest things is you have to be just constantly learning.
Right,
The
right,
best PF agents I've ever worked with are lifelong learners. Every time something comes up, you may have a cost mischarging case. You could have 3 different cost mischarging cases. It's all the same scheme, but every different perpetrator comes at it from a different angle.
right.
So you have to be able to constantly be willing to learn and see how that works.
Mhm.
PF has also secured some in-house capabilities. We've got analytical support in-house that provides support for our investigations, as well as audit support. We've got some auditors on board at every one of our locations that provide dedicated audit support to our fraud investigations.
Mhm.
That helps us with the resources to kind of build relationships between companies and people, and between companies and the Air Force, and
Right,
figure out how they're working.
right,
But really, in the end, having those agents dedicated to the fraud mission and not being pulled away to do other things has been the biggest enabler of our success in PF.
mhm.
I'll give you an example. In the 10 years, we looked it up, and in the 10 years prior to the stand-up of PF, the Central Systems fraud agents recovered about $1.8 billion. So
Uh-huh.
that's between 2003 and 2013.
Okay.
In the first 10 years of PF existence, so that's 2013 until 2023, we recovered $2.8 billion.
Wow.
So another $1 billion just because we reorganized and
Mhm.
centralized it
Mhm.
all under the subject matter experts.
Wow.
So it
That's
just shows you, when you have agents dedicated to the mission and provided with the tools and the policies they need to do it, you really, all you got to do is get out of the way. And
right.
OSI agents will do what OSI agents do, and they'll do amazing
Right.
things.
Right. I think you led segued, I should say, very nicely into my next question, Agent Hein. What are some of the more notable mission milestones that procurement fraud can reflect upon that have defined its legacy? Obviously, these last 10 years of recovering so much money has to be right up there with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, there's a whole list. Probably one of the biggest ones, obviously, was the stand-up of PF and the centralization of the mission
Uh-huh.
in 2013. Um, Probably in 2016 is when we brought in our first analyst support, and those were contract analysts that we brought in to help us. That is something the fraud mission had never really had a whole lot of experience in
Uh-huh.
and support from. So that was a big thing. In 2018, the OSI commander, the contracting commander for the Air Force, and the suspension debarment official of the Air Force signed a memorandum of understanding that basically requires all of us to work together,
Hmm.
and kind of put everybody in the acquisition community and the OSI community on notice that fraud was our job, and we were all kind of in this together, one team, one fight.
Right.
In 2020, PF started what we call the office hours, and that is a weekly training session that is hosted by PF headquarters staff that covers fraud training and database training, and that's been attended by PF agents and fraud agents and just OSI agents from all over the command on a
Right.
weekly basis.
Right. Well, you mentioned earlier,
That,
sir. Yeah, I'm sorry, sir. You mentioned earlier that training is kind of a never-ending process with the way things change, like you said, at the speed of the civilian sector.
Absolutely, yeah. Training is our number one thing. That recurring training. We have folks that come out once in a while, and if we get a really interesting case that is a new take on something, we'll have that agent brief and talk about what that case looks like, and how the fraudsters in that particular investigation went at it, and the uniqueness of it.
Yeah.
And like I said, the expansion of the analysts, we got more analysts in 2021. So we've got 2 GS analysts actually on staff, and we've got some more coming from the Palm in the future. So that's a huge win. And then 2022, we partnered with the Air Force Audit Agency, as I mentioned before, and they have provided auditors to us
Hmm.
to sit at each of our detachments, our main detachments. So that provides direct tactical level audit support to investigations, which is something we hadn't had before, dedicated to us. And the last couple things is, over the last couple of years, we have expanded to across the world. In 2022, we opened PF Desk 7, which is in Ramstein, Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2023, just actually about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, we opened PF Desk 8 in Yokota, in Japan, to cover down on PACAF and fraud allegations coming out of PACAF. So,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, lots of big high points over the last 10 years. It just keeps getting better. The mission keeps getting stronger.
Right. Now you mentioned that was a long list, and you're absolutely right, and it still continues to grow over the years. Speaking of another list, who have been some of the more significant contributors to PF success through the years in your mind? Obviously, I'm sure the list is long and distinguished, but are there any that kind of stand out in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd have to start with Brigadier General Kevin Jacobson, who stood PF up. I think that was the right call to make. And obviously, I mean, I'm biased, but I think
That's okay.
that was the right call to make, right? And really, I'd say former director Paul Walksmith, who I replaced, he was instrumental in getting a lot of these expansion of the mission and the support from the auditors and the analysts and the expansion of the mission overseas, as well as ran probably the greatest marketing campaign for PF in the history of the fraud mission. I mean, he got out there and explained what PF was so that everybody kind of knew who we were, what we did, and that really hadn't happened before in the manner that he did it.
Right.
Lieutenant Colonel Tolk, who is actually just leaving PF for his second time, I think, maybe third. He's had multiple assignments in PF from the time we stood up until now. Kind of spearheaded our growth and especially in data analytics, which is going to be a big factor in future fraud investigations, and as well as the mission. And then finally, General Bullard, who just retired, was a huge fan of fraud and a big champion of PF and the mission.
Right. Yeah, no doubt that some very heavy hitters have been involved in PF's success, and it again kind of plays into my next question. All that now being said about the past of procurement fraud, how would you characterize the future of the Office of Procurement Fraud Investigations going down the road?
I think we're just going to continue to grow and be more and more effective and more instrumental to the mission of OSI. As the U.S. increases funding for new research and we buy more complex technologies, it just makes it that much more sophisticated for fraudsters to take a bite out of us. So the dedicated fraud agents are that much more important, because as they become more sophisticated, we need to become more sophisticated as well. I think our in-house capabilities are going to grow as well. I mentioned in the next POM cycle, we've got a number of analysts coming to us. So we should have an analyst at every main detachment and an auditor at every main detachment, and that will help support those investigations and provide some links that we probably haven't had before, some information that we haven't been able to do. Obviously, we're growing geographically with the expansion of PF into Europe and to PACAF. So I think it's pretty safe to say that PF plays a vital role in protecting the DAF resources with a truly worldwide presence. We've reached into the Tech Protect mission. PF has always kind of worked the Tech Protect mission from the criminal side, but we've done a lot more partnering and collaborating with the counterintelligence side of OSI in talking about how to best protect technologies. The overall growth of the fraud mission is going to build more senior leaders in OSI that have some fraud experience, and we have expansion of other missions that could benefit from PF experienced people. The OSI L&O program, we have an L&O that sits at SAF-AQ, which is the acquisition command for the Air Force.
Now again, L&O stands for
liaison officer, the liaison officer positions. So we have an OSI agent that sits at the acquisition command, and we have another that sits over at the Department of Commerce. And those L&Os are great positions for PF trained agents. So I think that, and as we know, as budgets get tighter and funding gets less and less,
Right.
these companies and these people who try to get government contracts will just try to squeeze every penny they possibly can out of it. So
Mhm.
I've been doing this for 25 years now. We've
Yeah.
seen every time the budgets get really tight, our fraud cases start to go up.
Uh-huh.
So I imagine it'll just keep happening.
Well, it certainly must give you some personal satisfaction as the director of the Office of Procurement Fraud to see how such a high standard that the agents, under your charge have been given the command.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine that it's one team, one fight, as they say. And you mentioned a second ago that the partnerships have played an ever important and ever growing importance with the success of PF these days, I would imagine.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things my agents are really good at doing is we build relationships with our customers and with partner agencies and even within OSI. I mentioned the technology protection side.
Uh-huh.
Building the partnerships has been instrumental throughout PF's history in making sure that we're effective and we're protecting the Air Force to the best of our ability.
Sure. Now, before we wrap things up today, is there anything else you'd like to add about being part of OSI's 75th anniversary observance this year?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it'd be a good point to note that OSI started as the result of a fraud investigation, more specifically corruption investigation.
Mhm.
I mean, it wouldn't be a PF discussion if I didn't bring that up at least once.
Right, right.
Towards the end of World War II, Major General Bennett Myers was appointed the director of the Air Technical Service Command at Wright Field. Allegations against him were that he was reviewing all of the bids for work that he directed and then buying stock in the companies of the lowest bidder. Now,
Uh-huh.
at that point in time, we weren't doing lowest technically acceptable. It was flat out the lowest bidder. So he knew in advance what companies were probably going to get the contract. So he'd go out and buy stock in that
Uh-huh.
company prior to awarding it to them. Additionally, he was the de facto owner of a company called Aviation Electric Company out of Dayton, Ohio, which he used to steer profits to himself from contracting.
Uh-huh.
In the end, he took about $3 million in 1946 money, which is about $46 million today.
Wow.
Tried and convicted, served 20 months, and in addition, he was stripped of all of his rank, all of his decorations, and his pension for the rest of his life, and he kind of faded into history.
Right. Right.
So the 75th anniversary of OSI is celebrating 75th anniversary of 75 years of combating fraud for us in the department.
Mhm.
And that's a testament to the commitment to the mission. We've just gotten more and more committed to it as time has gone on. OSI has taken on many missions since then. I mean, we do counterintelligence in the austere environments and during wartime, the
Yeah.
cyber stuff that we're doing now, our focus on tech protect, many more, but it's really very, very humbling to see that there's still an emphasis on running quality, sufficient, timely fraud investigations that are important to the Air Force.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
I've dedicated my entire career to the fraud mission. I've been doing it since I came into OSI. I was doing white collar crime even before that because I truly believe that this is the best job in OSI. It's
Right.
in PF.
I see. Very well said. Our guest has been Special Agent Mr. Jason Hein, the director of OSI's Office of Procurement Fraud Investigations. Sir, thanks again for taking the time to be with us. It was great to chat with you, and thanks for the education.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne.
And thanks to all of you listening for tuning in. For OSI Today, I'm Wayne Amon saying so long for now.